Scott here, and thanks for joining me at the bench here for another edition of Wrap by Wrap. Today I wanted to cover splitting mayfly tails. And when it comes to splitting mayfly tails, you certainly have no shortage of options. I'm going to show you a few of my favorites, and we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So the first technique I'm going to demonstrate is called the dubbing ball split tail method. And this is probably the first method that I learned as a young fly tyer many years ago. And I'm starting here with the thread positioned just before the tailing point. And I've created a very compressed dubbing rope using the direct dubbing method. Just a small stretch of dubbing, very fine dubbing. I'm using kapok for this example. You want a dubbing material that you can really compress tightly. So once I've got that on my thread, and I've only got about an inch worth of dubbing on this thread, so not much, the less the better. Once I've got that established, I'm going to position my thread at the tailing point such that the dubbing starts to wrap, and I'm going to make a series of crossing wraps kind of in an X pattern just to build up that dubbing into a little ball here. You need to make crossing wraps, otherwise as you stack the thread it'll just fall to the side. So you want to make those crossing X-shaped wraps to get that dubbing ball effect. So once I've got the ball established, I'm going to position the thread just in front of the dubbing ball. So this fly is going to have two tails, and I'll be using this nylon microfibet material as my tailing material. But this technique works with just about any typical tailing material that you'd want to use. So I'm going to start by sizing my tails against the hook shank, and I'm pinching the tailing material where I intend to mount the material on the hook shank. So we'll call that the pinch point. So once I've got the material sized the way I want it, I'm going to transfer that pinch point from my right hand to my left hand. Then I'm going to hold the material against the near side of the hook shank at the tie-in point, just ahead of the dubbing ball. And I'm going to make a wrap to secure the material to the hook shank, and then I'm going to pull tension on that thread such that it influences the tailing material to move from the near side of the hook shank to the top. It's called a compression wrap, like so. So this tailing bundle will ultimately become the tail on the near side of the hook shank. I'm going to start by sizing the tail by comparing it to the existing tail. And it's a little long, so I'm going to adjust my pinch point. Once I've got the size matched, I'm going to transfer the pinch point once again to my left hand, fingers of my left hand. Then I'm going to hold it against the near side of the shank like I did with the other bundle. But this time I'm going to angle the fibers downward at a 45-degree angle. And this wrap that I make is going to be right on top of the previously made wrap for the other tailing bundle. I'm not going to advance the thread in one direction or the other. It's going to be right on top. Here once again, using a compression wrap, I'm going to pull tension on this thread to influence that material from the side of the shank to the top. Like so. So now you should have two bundles of material on top of the hook shank. So I'm now going to take a wrap rearward towards the dubbing ball. And at this point, that should cause the tailing fibers to come into contact with the dubbing ball and keep them separated. I'm going to use the fingertip of my left hand to just hold the fibers in place while I make that wrap, like so. Then I'm going to create a twisted thread, spinning my bobbin clockwise, a nice corded thread. I'm going to take one more wrap snugly up against that dubbing ball. And I can use the tension to control the amount of spread I want out of the fibers. Looking pretty good. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to work the thread forward, just further securing down the tag end of the tailing material before clipping off the excess. As you can see, I've got a pretty nicely split Mayfly tail using the dubbing ball split tail technique. Now the advantages of this technique include the simplicity. So it's not hard to get a nicely split Mayfly tail using the dubbing ball technique. Disadvantage is that it does create a bit of bulk. With this dubbing ball, you are starting out with a bit of bulk in this area of the fly that's normally the skinniest part of the fly, right here at the tailing point. So depending on the pattern you're tying, that may be an issue. So to avoid that bulk, you can use a technique called the thread split tail, which I will demonstrate next. So for the thread split tail, I'm going to secure my thread to the hook shank as usual. Advance the thread rearward to the tailing point just before the hook bend. So for this thread split tail, I'm going to once again be using microfibbits for my tailing material, except that I'm going to tie the entire clump of fibers in at once rather than one side at a time. I'm going to measure these to length, establishing my pinch point in my right hand, transfer that pinch point to my left hand, and secure the tailing fibers to the shank. Compression wrap to roll those fibers to the top of the hook shank. Check my length and finish securing the fibers to the hook, and then take my thread back to the tailing point at the end of the hook shank. So now, with the assistance of my dubbing needle, I'm going to divide the tailing fibers into 2 equal portions. I'm going to grab the portion nearest me on the near side of the shank in the fingers of my left hand. I'm then going to take my thread. First, I want to make sure I have a twisted thread at this point. I'm going to spin my bobbin clockwise, looking down from the top. Twist the thread. Then I'm going to bring the thread over top of the near bundle between the 2 tailing sections below the fibers on the far side of the shank. Then pull the bobbin slightly towards the front of the fly so that the thread is tightly resting up against the previous thread wraps, and leave it like so for now. Then I'm going to take my fingers and really pull the 2 sections apart. Make sure they stay separated. Then I'm going to take the thread, bring it up underneath the hook, in between the tailing sections, coming forward with the thread towards the hook eye, and make a wrap around the shank. And then I can continue working forward. Binding down the tailing material and clipping off the excess. So there we have a thread split tail, nicely splayed, separated mayfly tail. And you can clearly see the advantage of this method over the previous method, which was the dubbing ball method. There's really not much bulk here at all. There's no dubbing ball or anything like that, just a bit of thread buildup from where we tied in the tailing material. So that's it for the thread split method. One more technique I'd like to show you called the thread tag method is up next. So the final mayfly tail splitting technique I'd like to show you is called the thread tag technique. And I'm going to start by mounting the thread as I typically would, with the exception I'm not going to cut the tag end of the thread. I'm going to leave a portion of thread tag. I've got about a 4-inch tag of thread that I'm going to leave in place, and I've also ensured that the tag is on the top of the hook shank. I'm going to stop my thread wraps just about the hook at the hook point. So I tend to favor this tag split technique when the pattern I'm tying calls for a very slender body profile. This technique will result in very little bulk on the fly body. I'm going to use micro fibbits once again for this example. I'm going to start by sizing tailing material against the hook shank, establishing my pinch point in my right hand, transfer that pinch point to my left, and secure the fibers at my tie-in point with one single wrap, ensuring that the fibers are on top of the hook shank and on top of the thread tag as well. So now I'm going to hold the fibers and the thread tag in my left hand as I continue making wraps rearward, ensuring that all that material stays on top of the hook shank, and stop my rearward wraps just before the bend in the hook starts. At this point, I want to establish some separation between my tailing material. Get them divided into two distinct tails. So once I have some separation between the two tail fibers, I'm going to grab the tag of thread in my left hand, bring it up between the two sections of tail, transfer the thread to my right hand, and bring the tag downward to the hook shank and make a single thread wrap with my tying thread around the hook shank. At this point, I can take a look at my tailing fibers. If I've got the orientation I want, that's great. If I want a little more separation, I can pull tension on the thread tag to influence the tailing fibers in the direction and the orientation I want them to be before securing the tag with some tight wraps of thread. And once all that's secure, I can go ahead and clip off the excess tailing material and tag. And what you can do at this point, you can manually push these into a better orientation position, and you can even add a drop of head cement or UV resin here at the base of the tail, at the tailing point, if you desire, to really hold those into position. And as you can see, advantage here, once again, it results in even less bulk than the thread split method, and certainly much less bulk than the dubbing ball method that we previously demonstrated. So that's it for the thread tag mayfly tail split method, and that's it for this video on splitting mayfly tails in general. I hope you found these demonstrations helpful, and we'll see you next time on Wrap by Wrap. Thanks for watching.